Okay, we're recording. So Hank and Diane have at it.
Okay, I think we agreed that I would start out and then talk for about 2 minutes, and then Hank will do the same thing. Uh, what, as Steve said, we're talking about cooperation fatigue. Not exactly what is it? Well, first of all, let's think what cooperation is. Cooperation, as defined by evolutionary psychologists anyway, is doing something at a cost to the self that brings a benefit to somebody else, whether it's a person or a group or a, a relative or whatever. Um, and actually, in the beginning, evolutionary theory had trouble accounting for uh, cooperation, the existence of it, because it was first conceived not by Darwin, but by later followers, as explaining that everything evolved through competition. But if you look around, obviously, everything is not competition. There are a lot of uh, acts of human cost incurment, let's say, for in favor of benefit to somebody else. So, how does evolutionary theory account for this cooperation, which we see everywhere? Well, there's several ways. One is kin selection, the selfish gene theory. Everybody knows selfish gene theory. Reciprocal altruism, where you give, but you also expect to receive in return. And multi-level selection, which tells us that there's going to be competition within a group, but also cooperation within a group, because the bigger competition is between groups. And so that's just the background. But if cooperation is so ideal for uh, for groups, why do we also see that we get tired somewhere along the way and tend to withdraw? So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Hank is going to have quite a bit to say about that. I'm mostly going to ask questions about it, actually. I mean, this is something that you can, it may be a cyclical kind of thing where, you put out the effort. Obviously, cooperation requires some kind of effort. So you need to rest. Or maybe it could be something else. So it could be a just basically protective biological mechanism like resting after physical effort. There are lots of studies of cooperation fatigue, mostly in work psychology, industrial psychology. What people go through when they put out too much effort in collaboration within organizations. And the sort of extreme of it is burnout. But I think tonight we're just focusing not really on burnout where you know, get out of the relationship altogether, but fatigue where you withdraw and rest. Now, one of my questions is, what does this rest consist of? Is it just withdrawal from the relationship, or is it a reversion to competition? Is competition more basic, or are they two sides of the same coin? I mean, this is something we can be talking about. Um, there are other questions. What kinds of relationships are we most likely to see cooperation fatigue in? Or what kinds of relationships are we least likely to see it in? And in other words, some kinds of relationships may be more resilient or more susceptible to cooperation fatigue. And so we could contrast, caring relationships versus exchange relationships versus authority relationships, et cetera, et cetera. There might be personality differences. Are some people more likely to get fatigued by cooperation or less? Could there be cultural differences? Whether it's economic kinds of differences or cultural themes, you might say, like individualism versus collectivism, those kinds of things. Does religious belief make a difference? Does the type of religion make a difference? We talked about rituals a couple months ago. Could rituals help to protect against cooperation fatigue, or could they help to overcome it? Or do they make people more susceptible to it? Is another kind of question. Could groups or societies as a whole suffer from cooperation fatigue, or is it just individuals? Uh, and as I said at the beginning, does cooperation fatigue make us more selfish or just make us withdraw? So with those questions, I'll turn it over to Hank and he will lead us elsewhere. Turn on your voice, Hank. Unmute. Unmute.
You're muted, Hank.
Lower left-hand corner, I think.
No. No, you're still muted, Hank.
Hank, can you hear me?
You can hear.
On
You
Android,
have
it's
to,
the
you have to
upper
unmute.
right hand. Yeah, on Android, it's the upper right
Oh,
hand
okay,
corner.
I got it. Can you hear me now?
Now.
Okay, sorry guys, my vision, I just had some cataract surgery, so it's only the third day and every little dot is hard to find. So,
Okay.
but I made my little talks very big. So thanks, Diane. Now, did everybody see these little infographics I sent out? A couple people did. You have them. Well, I'll go through them, but I thought if people had a chance to see it, we'd go through it more quickly. But let me go through it. So it's Steve sent it out for me, which is great, and I sent two of them. So I think I'll ask my question as well as Diane's differently complex questions, and Diane talked and I talked about it. Why don't we think about it as I do my little talk, and you've been reading or whatever, about your own experiences individually, in families, in small groups, bureaucracies, whatever you want to, whatever system, what's going on in our culture, uh, to think about your own experiences in those situations, whether you're a kid or as an adult now or with your families. So it's kind of ubiquitous to certain degrees. And so the other is, even though Diane didn't say much about cooperation burnout, I'll take a little more on that. So I will suggest the differences. So on my chart, um, I have three different domains that ChatGPT was very nice about printing out for me after I was able to prompt it. So take a look at it. But I put it in terms of small face-to-face groups, which is our ancestors, small, medium-sized groups, and large-scale systems. So face-to-face, as we know, is what was the guy's name? 150 people or less, that number.
Dunbar.
Dunbar, yeah. Um, so let's see if I can go through it quickly, and you can look at it some other time because I think we have enough for discussion. But there are very few members, and there's a lot of in-person interaction in medium and small groups. Uh, I don't know, the numbers they give are more, but you could say it's in that range of the Dunbar, but not too much outside of 150. And in large scale groups, which is on a bureaucratic level, uh, living in a community where you don't see a lot of people, where you live in the suburbs, or um, so the strength in the small face-to-face groups that there are rich personal bonds and there's a high degree of trust. In the small medium groups, you have more diverse skills and there's ability to coordinate practically like you can in small face-to-face groups. And in large systems, you have a wide reach and vast amount of collective resources. The next, in vulnerabilities, there are fewer perspectives and there are limited expertise in a small face-to-face group. In the small medium group, there's lack of cohesion and role ambiguity, where people are not exactly sure what roles they play, and things get confused. And in a large group, the simplistic way of looking at it is there's coordination, complexity, and low trust, and obviously minimal or almost no face-to-face contact. In small groups, the greatest risks are groupthink. Let's see if I can read this, and an excessive amount of insularity. In the small size groups, rather, there are unclear roles and coordination failure possibilities. And in a large group, it's their language is bureaucracy. Any large organization, as we know from way back, Max Weber and all of the sociologists, and quite a bit of disengagement. The next is breakdown patterns, where there's on the face-to-face groups, where there are interpersonal conflict and exclusion of dissent. In the small medium groups, there are misaligned goals and overextension, as well as cognitive overload, which would be in all of those. And in breakdown patterns for the large groups, there's fragmentation and gridlock. All right, so these are the little blurbs that was put together by ChatGPT. What helps them thrive? In small face-to-face groups, you want to reinforce the face-to-face communication and a bit of the opportunities for or creating more opportunities for participatory decision making, just like the pro-social attitudes. What was the Nobel Prize winner? I just can't think of it.
Ostrom?
Yeah, Ostrom's thing is mentioned in a few of the research. That's just one of many. And what helps in these large groups, and this is pretty limited, but you want to create decentralized leadership. You want to have shared identity rather than diffuse identity, and transparent processes. So these are kind of so look at those things later if you want to learn more and integrate it. But the question again is, oh, I want to add one more thing that I didn't expect to, but in my research, and I won't talk about it now, but I will send a thing. Where is it here? Give me a second. Oh, I came across, some people have heard about it, and I hope we can do a talk on it someday, on moral injury, which is another, I guess we could say, cooperation fatigue, cooperation burnout, and what happens when there is moral injury. You know, like there's oppression, there's genocide, there's some of the stuff that's going on in this country for some of us who believe there's moral injury. And so I'll just send that out.
You know,
Put it
and Hank, to relate this to cooperation, I'm hearing a little feedback. Does anybody else hear that? Yeah, I'm
Is
not.
that mine?
No, I don't know. I hear my own voice.
I think it is because I hear your own voice echoing, Hank.
Okay,
sometime.
you know what
Yeah.
I did?
Why don't you mute
I-
yourself, Hank, and see if that helps? I was just going to say that to add to the list of Diane's questions and relating it to the material Hank just presented would be to ask whether cooperation fatigue operates in different ways in small, medium, and large groups.
Exactly.
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
connect the group size issue. So Diane, you gave us a list of pretty good questions. Which one would you like us to start chewing on? Do you have a bit?
Well, let's start with the Hanks because it seems like the most general one. I mean,
Okay.
is it really easier to stick with cooperation in, you would guess, small groups rather than large groups?
It's certainly easier to freeload in a larger group.
Exactly.
So you can get away with not cooperating the more anonymous you are in a large group, I think.
So that brings up the question of what kind of relationships are we talking about? Are we talking about caring relationships or exchange relationships or authority relationships?
Hmm.
I don't know how you would relate that to group size, except that it would seem that, for example, exchange relationships might be more common in mid-sized groups and authority relationships might be more common in large groups, especially if they're bureaucracies or governments or, something like that.
But aren't even intimate relationships an exchange of caring, a mixture of caring and exchange? So just think about a family, or think about two partners raising children. That's a caring relationship, but there's also exchange going on too, right?
Well, those things change according to the needs of the moment also.
Mhm.
Now I'm hearing feedback. I think it's everybody because,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can fix it on my end as the host, but I'm not quite sure what I can do.
My sound is fine. I'm hearing everything perfectly.
Sounds fine to
Okay.
me.
How about me?
Ken, I think it might be you giving feedback. Because I'm on a phone, it's flashing to whoever's talking, and it keeps flashing over to you, Ken, which means some sound might be coming in through your mic somehow.
So maybe mute yourself, Ken, and see if that happens. Mute yourself. Mute yourself when you're not talking. We'll see if that works. Okay. Okay. Rob.
One of the things that Diane's questions raise for me is the fact that we seem to live in the age of resentment. And I have a feeling that when people feel like they're being taken advantage of in groups, small, medium, or large, they begin to feel resentment rather than, and it's not a question of fatigue, it's a real question of being triggered to hostility. And I think that it probably operates differently in the various size groups. The small group, you might be more reticent to express your resentment since it's friends, supposedly. Large groups, you probably form subgroups and share resentment. But I think that's a powerful motivator, especially today since it's the dominant form.
Do you want me to manage the queue, Diane
Yeah,
and Hank?
please.
Okay. I think
Sure.
Andy was next and then Diane.
Dan, would you like to respond directly to Rob? I can wait.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Rob too.
Go ahead, Diane. You go first.
So do I. Let Andy. Okay, sorry.
Okay. So that brings up the question of whether there is such a thing as cooperation fatigue or is it always resentment?
Well, resentment could be a facet of cooperation fatigue as a larger. It can, cooperation fatigue contains maybe several elements, resentment of which could be one. Yeah. Yeah,
What
Andy?
respond?
But what I was hoping to share was builds on that, on Diane's thought. If you just think about the logic of natural selection and why it would build cooperative behavioral strategies, it's pretty clear that any such cooperative strategy should be conditional, right? So you cooperate if the conditions are right, but then you withdraw your cooperation if the conditions are wrong. If that's not built in, indiscriminate cooperation is a losing evolutionary strategy. So it would appear that natural selection has instilled in us a sensitivity to presumably some kind of balance of
Yes.
benefits versus costs. So if a given relationship is paying off in terms of more benefits than costs, I think we tend to be pretty okay with it and let it continue. But when we start to get the sense that we're being taken advantage of, or that it's more effort than it's worth, then either resentment or fatigue could set in. And you could easily imagine that, you know, cognitive subroutines for fatigue and resentment could be constructed. Well, I imagine that the emotion of resentment was crafted by this very dynamic, but the emotion or feeling of fatigue was probably crafted for other purposes, and then but it's not hard to imagine that it was accepted or leveraged by the evolutionary forces that try to fine tune our cooperation behavior.
Andy, let me ask you a question that just stimulate what you said, just stimulated in me. So you were kind of talking about, a cognitive mechanism or routine that does some math and makes a decision about whether I'm getting more benefits than costs from my cooperation. So let's assume I'm in a relationship in whatever size group in which that is the case. In fact, I am coming out ahead by my cooperative behavior. Would that mean I therefore never experience cooperation fatigue in that type of relationship? Because my gut says I still would.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't think our brains always process cost benefit directly. Sometimes we just rely on the feelings that kind of subliminally convey, this ain't working out so good, or
Mhm.
so it wouldn't surprise me if something like a cost benefit optimizer was built on top of emotions that don't have to actually look carefully at costs and benefits or do any math.
Although some emotions might be directly tied to it. So to go back to the idea of resentment, one way to think about resentment is that it's a result of an assessment that you're being taken advantage of and that the costs to you are outweighing the benefits. That's kind of when you start to feel resentful. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think we have it.
Emotions are
Yeah.
probably our mind's way of communicating calculations to us
We have
efficiently.
Hank and then Rob.
Yeah, I guess I want to remind us that we're talking about, and I use the word group dynamics very loosely, but we're talking about not individual behavior particularly, but the group system. And let's talk the medium-sized group. So, a while ago we talked about scapegoating. So if the group or the leader of the group or the alpha is experiencing that there's a threat to cohesion, or group members are experiencing it, one way to approach it is scapegoating. So I think if we could stay with the group mechanisms of about, you got to excuse me, my throat's. So we're talking about individual regulation, but here we're talking about group dynamics or group relation, and how does the individuals come together as a group as a whole, and the group experiences more cooperation fatigue than cooperation benefits.
That's interesting.
So
We've been talking about cooperation fatigue as an individual variable,
yeah,
but you're kind of implying that we could also talk about how much cooperation fatigue exists collectively in the
That's right.
entire group. Interesting. I think we have Rob and then Kathleen.
I'm just thinking that resentment has been weaponized the last 10 years or so in this country and turned into a mass cooperative movement against. So the scapegoating is a very important feature of the kind of politicization of mass resentment. It's an I guess it's not uncommon. I suppose it was the same in Weimar, Germany.
Mm,
I didn't live there, but
yeah.
it's possible. But it's a mass movement, and I think it reinforces itself. So
So
how do we-
there's within group. I think we'd have to distinguish when we're talking about resentment. Are we talking within group or between groups?
between groups?
So between group resentment is a little bit different than within group. Within group resentment, it would be more the calculus, I think, that I'm being taken advantage of. Well, maybe it's the same between groups that would cause it, but yeah,
I think it starts with individual resentment,
Yeah.
Yes,
and
you
then
know,
they find like-minded people on social media, and
yeah. Okay.
why do people get divorced, for example? In marriages,
because they're pissed off.
resentment is very common.
Yes.
It's because the exchange is not working well. So exchange can happen at every level.
I think we had Kathleen. Your hand was up at one point, and then Chris.
Yeah. Rob said a lot of what I was going to say, but I would just add, the resentment is being artificially stoked, and it's being stoked precisely against cooperative endeavors like trying to solve climate change or universal health care. And it's almost as if, I get the impression the resentment is being stoked and the people are feeling angry and they're being led to think, well, I'm being forced to cooperate against my will. That
Mhm.
I'm not, I think the resentment comes first, but it's being artificially recruited in a new way.
Well, and it is, I think the message is you're being taken advantage of by these people. That's
Yeah.
that's what stokes the resentment. Chris,
The elites or the immigrants.
go ahead, Chris.
And I had two things. Briefly, I think it interacts with other things like general stress levels. People have less energy for cooperation if they're under a lot of stress.
Mhm.
But historically, I'm interested in kind of what happened with all the utopian experiments of people living together. And I actually had a whole class on that as an undergraduate. And the groups that experimented with this that did not have a strong common religious backing and not just an ethical backing, a background that was shared. The ones with the religious background were much more likely to hang in there over time than the ones who came into it with shared values or ethics that were more humanist. And of course, this bothers me as basically a humanist, but that kind of runs through that literature.
Isn't
And I
there
think
in
it's
those utopian, at least 19th century utopian communities, there's a fair amount of peer pressure to be cooperative, though, right?
Well, right, but it didn't matter if you were the transcendentalists in New England; they couldn't make it work.
Okay.
But the Shakers could, and Amana did for a while, and there were so these. So I think sort of like the peer pressure. Maybe the peer pressure is greater in a shared faith community. I don't know, a perceived external pressure that's not about the people around you, but more about some belief system, God-driven belief system. Yeah.
I also think involuntary cooperation sounds like an oxymoron to me. If it's not voluntary, it's not really cooperation. It's coerced something or other. But I just seems like
Obedience, coerced
cooperation by
obedience.
definition has to be volitional. Anyway, Ken,
I was just gonna, by the way, was there any benefit to my muting myself, or is
yes,
there, how are people hearing that?
yes, and
Okay,
thank you for being so cooperative about it.
of course. I was just about to say that perhaps the nature of the adaptive fictions and the strength to which one uh, attaches to them is it would seem to me be very important in motivating commitment. I mean, there are some people that'll strap a bomb to their bodies and whereas you have other people whose participation may well be, and this is another issue. This all gets very complicated. Another issue, and that's so much of it is either partial or entirely self-interest, either from to improve social recognition or in some cases even a financial return. Um, and so that will certainly affect. I don't have a specific point here on that subject, but I did want to say too that from resentment, it seems to me that what resentment is anger that is not able to be general anger that is not able to be expressed, that is not effectively expressed, often because if one can't, and very often it's a social control that prevents one from expressing it. So it's an anger that's held over a long period of time, below the curtain in the subconscious. It's,
That's interesting. I do find it this is a little tongue-in-cheek comment, but it is interesting that in a discussion about cooperation and cooperation fatigue, how quickly all of us have honed in on resentment. I don't know what that says about all of us. Maybe we all are very cooperative folks who harbor some unconscious resentment we don't express often. I don't know.
Just
Scott?
yeah, I resent having to mute myself.
Yes. Go ahead, Scott.
One of the things that seems to be missing here, by my understanding, which isn't very much about anthropology, is that the discussion seems to be focused on what I would call the like North Atlantic culture, the weird. I think is another acronym that.
Mhm.
But what about cultures where cooperation is the norm? I mean, we're in this highly competitive, technologically driven environment. We kind of sometimes think that that's all that there is, but a lot of the world, I think, or at least some significant portions of it, don't look at it that way. I mean, aren't there places like Japan? It comes to mind as far as a place that maybe it was, sort of a forced cooperation, but there was the sense that you're always doing things for this collective, which is sort of a cooperative thing that's built in. So anyway, just this discussion so far seems to be, and the whole thing about resentment and burnout seems to be focused more on our modern Western
Yeah,
culture.
and Diane touched on that in one of her questions at the end of her list of questions. She mentioned cultural differences, particularly between individualistic versus more communal, not communist, but communal, communitarian um, cultures.
they,
Of course, they're a
they generally
continuum.
call
That's a
them
continuum. Yeah.
collectivistic. There's a suggestion that we can actually group cultures into three. One is individualism, in which people are primarily interested in not necessarily themselves, but in individual flourishing, let's say.
Mhm.
And there are collectivistic groups who believe that in order for everybody to be happy, you actually have to make everybody happy, sort of. You have to keep people's face. And a third is an honor culture, which is quite different from both of them. And characterizes, I think, most of the Middle East and some African cultures and maybe some others I don't know very much about. But where reputation is everything. And so cooperation within groups to maintain the group, like the family, honor is very collective, you might say. Everybody has to cooperate, and if they don't, it has to be cleaned up, sometimes violently. It's a, there's quite a spread of these cultural orientations.
But is the implication
But
is the implication that cooperation fatigue happens more quickly, more easily in more individualistic cultures?
exchange relationships are very basic in individualistic cultures.
Mm-hmm. So if my relationship with you is primarily transactional rather than intimate and caring, then that value mechanism is really going to be operating pretty consciously. And if I feel I'm being taken advantage of, I will either end the relationship or I'll experience cooperation fatigue. I'll call it a thankless job, right? And end it. And then perhaps those kind of relationships transactional relationships happen less often or experienced differently in more collectivist cultures.
They're experienced differently.
Mm-hmm. Hank, you've got your hand up for a while.
Yeah. Again, I want to bring us we're moving back to individual dynamics. In my work, I did a lot of studies in group dynamics and group therapy, but also group dynamics, small group dynamics. So if we think about, I use the language, the group as a whole. In other words, the sum is greater than the sum of its parts. So we have mimicking and affective contagion. So if one person feels dissatisfied or burdened, it's not a big deal. But when it spreads, then it's not an individual dynamic, but a group dynamic. So with that in mind, if we have face-to-face groups, there'll be less reason for alienation because you see each other, you feel an emotional tie, there's a norm regulation going on that can be reinforced more easily. But when you get to, let's say, the larger system, like our culture and resentment, there's no regulation of that. As a matter of fact, I think Diane said, or somebody said, there's a system that operates to be anti-cooperation. And so we're talking at a higher level where this resentment, I would put in the category of moral oppression and moral outrage rather than fatigue, cooperation fatigue, or burnout. Let me just read the on moral injury, which is also what gets activated is sense of shame, betrayal, moral anger and disgust, grief, and meaning rupture. So I think we're talking about another level that's going on this larger level, or any autocratic system where oppression is taking over, where
Yeah, I think moral injury is an interesting topic. I'm struggling to connect it as closely to cooperation fatigue. But as you were talking, Hank, one of the things that is quite different in a small group compared to a large anonymous group is the need for reputation management. In a small group, Dunbar size and less, you want to have a reputation as somebody who is cooperative. And so experiencing cooperation fatigue and ending cooperation, even if it's temporary, does carry more risk to reputation management than it might in a larger group where there's more anonymity. I'm thinking. I know, Kathleen, you have your hand up, but after Kathleen, I'd be curious if we could personalize this topic a little bit and talk about when in our own lives we've experienced cooperation fatigue and see if that gives us any insights into the topic if people are willing. Kathleen, go ahead.
Just in terms of finding alternatives to resentment as what drives or what defines cooperation fatigue, I think like maybe another thing is just we have a built-in enjoyment of some novelty, and a group is going to tend to be doing the same agreed upon things. And it's actually good for the group to sometimes get away and
Mhm.
that's how we preserve our independent judgment, which can be good for us and also good for the group.
Mhm.
And as long as you were talking about personal experiences, I was just thinking how being in a department in a college and always doing things with the group, but then I'm fortunate to get paid sabbatical leave every 6 semesters. And
That's
then it's
a new name for sabbaticals. We could call them cooperation fatigue time off.
yeah. And frankly, when somebody else goes on leave, I'm like, yeah, I can get away from that person for a while, you know. And I'm sure they feel that way about me. But anyway, I was just kind of bringing that in that is it's considered good for the group. It's actually sanctioned by the college because they understand that we do things in groups, but we're also expected to come up with individual creative original things. So
So a group that would have a norm it's acceptable to withdraw and recharge your batteries wouldn't damage your reputation to do that. But a group in which the norm is you never should feel fatigued. We always need you to be cooperating that's going to be a negative if you need to do that. Andy?
Just got a recent example of cooperation fatigue to share that's not going to reflect well on my character, but when America's current president was recently reelected, I was so filled with fatigue and despair after months of trying to deliver my home state of Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris. I was just so dejected, so fatigued, so wrung out, so discouraged that I simply stopped donating to progressive causes. I unsubscribed to dozens and dozens and dozens of things that were asking me for money several times a day each.
Mm-hmm.
And stopped watching the news. I actually succumbed to an actually morally inexcusable form of ostrich behavior, stuck my head in the sand and just pretended that the second Trump administration wasn't happening. It felt emotionally necessary, but I don't think it reflects well on my.
Well, Andy, in fairness to yourself, I don't think you were alone in that reaction. And it was also probably temporary. And it does sound like, in a way, you did some of that value calculus where you looked at the costs and effort you had put in, and the return on that investment seemed woefully insufficient. So you experienced cooperation fatigue or something similar to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Andy, how did it, this is maybe too personal, but if we talk about a group, what do you call it, affective contagion, how did your personal response, which was not mine exactly, but many people I know, how did it affect your surroundings? I mean, you're just one person, but you have a family, you have colleagues. Was there a contagion of your solo fatigue? Did it burn others out or fatigue others out, or did you keep it? How far did it spread, and did it
Right.
affect your most
He's
immediate?
asking if you were patient zero, Andy, is what he wants to know.
Patient zero in the resignation to the Trump authoritarian takeover. Possibly. I'm enough of a fan of Hank's idea here that almost any behavior can spread by transmission, right? Any behavioral tendency can
That's your
kind of rub
viral.
off on others.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if other people and friends who used to, rally to my calls to show up at political rallies, if a lot of them just basically unplugged as well. So, yeah.
This can be very, what's the proper word? I don't know, not in person at all. during the same events, I
Mhm.
was not active, except that I was actively following everything. I was very emotionally involved. And I went through the same letdown and withdrawal. I stopped watching TV for a few days. And my behavior was not an example to anybody. It wasn't connected to anybody else's except in my own imagination. I mean, so vicarious withdrawal is something that can happen.
The personal example that popped into my mind for whatever reason is something quite different, which is the cooperation fatigue I sometimes felt as a parent of three children. With two career family and three children, with 10 years from the oldest to the smallest, and certainly there were times when I can remember feeling just stretched too thin and exhausted, and I had nothing more to give anybody in my family, and I needed to recharge my batteries in some way. So that says to me that cooperation fatigue can happen in intimate caring relationships, not just these more transactional ones where, you know, I'm not doing a value calculus with my children. I'm not saying, well, what am I getting back for the effort I put in? So the fatigue wasn't related to feeling taken advantage of. It just, the caring gets tiring at times. So I'm not sure how that fits into all of this. Ken and then Hank.
Just briefly, I wonder if cooperation fatigue is responsible for family abuse, especially in larger families
Mm,
to some extent. And the other thing I was going to do is share something fairly straightforward. Um, I think we can understand this. In 2010, I got together with a few friends. We established a local chapter of the American Humanist Association. I helped them get a tax situation and get incorporated. And then over the next 2 years, um, and I worked very hard to get this together. And over the next 2 years, people simply, the activities they were engaged in moved more and more politically. And I consider myself the last of the sensible centrists. And they were somewhere to the left of Leon Trotsky. And they were very interested in doing just that. So I guess I could describe what I experienced as burnout, and I said goodbye.
mhm. We have some newcomers. Chris, you haven't been here before, I don't think. I'm wondering if I don't want to put you on the spot, but I also want to encourage you to jump in and share any thoughts that you might have. You are muted if,
Could I just
yeah, go ahead,
could I
Ken.
just add, could I
Yeah,
just add to what I said? And that's
yeah.
just to say that the alteration or the evolution of the nature of the cooperation of the goal can be a factor in burnout.
Hmm. Chris, did you want to chime in at all? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you're unmuted now.
Can you hear me? Yeah, hi. I'm from the UK, as you probably pick up. I have been before, but a while
Oh,
ago.
forgive me.
No, it's fine. Yeah, no, interesting discussion, and obviously in the backdrop of what's happened in the USA, it's I at least have witnessed that. I obviously can't experience it in the same way as you have, but I think going back to the sort of topic of making sense of what's happening here, that I'm not sure I'm very happy about the link between cooperation and fatigue. I don't know if that makes much sense to me. Someone else was talking about the exchange, the idea of fatigue being you've run out of something, and the idea that in some sense the energy in is greater than the benefit out, and that sort of exchange of things that might lead you towards cooperative behavior. And cooperative behavior, I guess, a good cooperative behavior is in its nature cooperative. It benefits both parties. And what's difficult is that, as we've all been talking about, that sometimes you end up with a feeling that you're not coming out as well as you might have done in the exchange. And One of the things that I can't really put it together, put it out there, that I can't make the link myself. But one thing that seems to come from that's happening online a lot is this idea of virtue signaling. And you were talking about prestige and virtue signaling, and the idea that there is this sort of way of kind of punishing people for attempting to appear cooperative, but it's actually just for their own purposes. And I don't know where that really fits in this, but it's something I feel that's going to continue, and I think it's going to become quite a really big issue, is to decide what it is.
Performative cooperation really is what you're describing. It's a reputation management issue, I think, right? To be perceived as
right in there. I agree with that. Yeah, reputation is really important as what's going on here.
Yeah. And you also make a good point when you mention that cooperation benefits both parties. We don't want to confuse cooperation with self-sacrificial behavior. It's, I think the fatigue happens when the return on the investment seems insufficient, but there always is some return on the investment. Otherwise, if it's all cost to you and no benefit to you, that's almost more self-sacrificial behavior than cooperative behavior. Hank and go ahead. Chris. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think I've been struggling myself thinking about the whole concept of the way we look at good and bad, and so we look at good behavior on the whole, apart from good objects, things that do what they're supposed to do. But if you look at a person's character, if you like, as being good, a person who gives a great deal, and a person who's selfish, just does it for themselves. But I feel that we need to define. This is taking us off the topic, but perhaps for another time. Just very quickly, I'll end there. But basically, the idea that maybe we need to define better what we mean by good. I think it's. I know that's what all the other things are for, like cooperation and virtue and various other things that are kind of there. But I think it's an important part of what's happening. It seems to me that in social media, we are beginning to lose. Faith is the wrong word, but we're beginning to we're losing something about what it means to show good behavior is no longer seen by others as it's something that can be attacked in a way, like virtue signaling. It's not holding the ground it used to.
Yeah, reputation management would be a good topic for an Examine Lives someday, particularly reputation management in an online world, so to speak. Hank and then Andy.
Yeah. Based upon what a few people have been talking about today, on the large, I'm going to bring it back to group behavior. So here's a question about, and I know there are enough people here who are thinking about it, but the moral arc, is there a universal morality? And Chris, you were talking about what's good and bad. So is that a universal morality that it's best to cooperate as much as possible, and that's the norm we want to create and perpetuate and do everything we can. Now we're talking about non-person-to-person contact. We're talking about, let's say, the oppression that's going on here in the States and other cultures, but right now here. So is there let's see what I wrote down. Is there can there be a collective mitigating movement on a larger scale with millions of people or globally to mitigate and respond to the diminishment, the movement to diminish cooperation for the greater good? I got it out. Is there such a thing as cooperation for the greater good? And is that greater good bad behavior or good behavior? And what's going on, let's say, in this country or in our small communities about how we're dealing with this assault on so-called greater good, pro-social behavior?
Okay, we'll go to Andy. And Andy, we must be having a heated discussion because you've shed your outer layers as the conversation has gone on. So you're warming up.
Yeah, it's your warm, friendly presence, y'all. But yeah, I was just wondering if the concept of cooperation fatigue sheds any light on various lapses in civic virtue. So many of us are very concerned about just disengagement from politics entirely and democracies and how that can prefigure authoritarian rise, that kind of thing. Think about all of the disdain we relatively privileged people tend to heap onto low information voters and people who are just willfully ignorant of like what's going on, who just don't have the time or the attention to follow politics. And I mean, this is the very thing I've just confessed to being guilty of, all things I've just confessed to being guilty of. I wonder if the vast majority of people who are just checked out politically are simply just fatigued by politics and maybe life more generally, to the point where they just don't have a lot of energy to spend on informing themselves, staying up to date, staying engaged, getting out to vote, things like that.
Okay. Ken and then Kathleen.
Okay, just to respond to Hank, yes, there's an organization, by the way, called Braver Angels, whose goal is to reduce conflict in public policy discussion. It's a really very interesting organization. You might want to look them up. Um, in terms of the problem is that we have an exaggeration now of the difference. I happen to be hosting a discussion of Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, and he notes six different areas of moral, the bases of moral, and so they're quite different. And very often, historically, they've been geographically located, but now we have dramatic difference in the United States. Some people, especially on the left, for care and harm seems to be the big thing, but for others, it's loyalty or betrayal. It's, violation of a dogma, perhaps, or for libertarians, it's group versus individual. And there are at least six of these areas, and they seem to have been exaggerated in the last 15 to 20 years. And some of them are at the basis of the current populism we're seeing, I would think.
Yes.
Thoughts?
Kathleen?
I would just say, don't overestimate people's intelligence. I mean, that people have gotten a whole lot stupider as a result of, various the new technologies. And we are educated, we're used to talking with one another, but for various reasons, I have to interact quite regularly with some local people. My sister married into her family. My sister's dead now, and I've got to deal with the kids. And unbelievably stupid, just and easily duped. And some of them think they're well informed because they're listening to the news, or they're,
I do think that there's a kernel of truth in what Andy is saying in terms of just how much bandwidth you have to devote to intelligently follow political developments depends on how much free time you have in your life. And that depends to some degree on, do you need to work 2 jobs, and are you raising 1 kid or 4, and all of those kinds of things. I mean, I know just since I've been retired, I have far more time to read and follow political events than I did when I was working. So just there's I think some proof in that. There's obviously going to be a bell curve of intelligence. I know some pretty dumb leftists as well. So, but anyhow, it's just to be fair. Hank?
Yeah, just say one thing on what Kathleen is saying. I've been looking into some literature that's becoming a new field in the social sciences. I don't know, Diane, if you're on top of it, but it's the literature, academic literature on the proliferation of ignorance. I've been reading up on it for a while. And it's not about, if you read the literature, it's nothing to do with intelligence. It's large group behavior, and what's going on here in this country is something like that. But I think it's not about intelligence. It's much more about how you create enough fear, you create enough uncertainty, you create enough anxiety. Let me go to the neurobiology of the brain. You activate the God, I can't think straight today with that surgery.
Amygdala.
That's right, the amygdala, and the amygdala automatically sends a message to the neocortex and says, "I don't need you right now. I'm scared shit. I'm worried. I'm overwhelmed. I'm burnout. I'm going to be reactive. I'm not going to use good judgment. I'm not going to participate in the realities of social life or political life." So I just want to add that we should think about the bigger picture, that how easy it is to perpetuate, and reinforce an attitude of ignorance on a large scale.
I think we've drifted off topic a little. Can I bring us back a bit to cooperation fatigue? Maybe we all got tired of cooperating and talking about the same thing, so we all just decided to talk about whatever we wanted to. But I'd like to try to sometimes, like herding cats, bring us back a little bit to the topic of cooperation fatigue. And just so people are aware, we are ostensibly done at noon, but what we've decided to do over the past maybe 6 or 7 months was we'll go, for those people that want to leave at noon, feel free to leave. For those people that want to keep talking for about another half hour, we usually do that. So that's why we'll go to 12:30 for those who want to stay. And Alan, before, I know you're feeling ill, but before you do go, I did want to check in with you because you had said you were going to facilitate our December discussion on oxytocin and the science of us versus them. So are you still on board for doing that next month, Alan? Are you there?
Yeah. And I think it'll be an excellent follow-up to this discussion, actually.
Okay, that's great. Okay.
Feel better.
Yeah, and
yeah, thank you.
If you
Yeah,
send me a description and resources, and I'll get them posted on Hilo. So anyhow, so
okay, will do.
Hank, is your hand
Steve,
still
I want to
hand up again?
respond.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to respond to your comment. When I talk about the proliferation of ignorance in a society and a culture, it's totally connected to cooperation fatigue and burnout, because there's a perpetuation of being informed. And so being informed, or your group being informed, or your in-group, it's going to be too much.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see the connection in the sense that if I don't understand how, well, this may sound political, but I'll say it this way anyway. If I don't understand how the common weal benefits me, even if it's indirectly. So, for example, social welfare programs that reduce the number of people that end up in prison, it indirectly benefits me because there's less societal costs involved. So if people don't see the connection between the common good and the personal good, it certainly could contribute to cooperation fatigue, I think. Yeah.
Even cooperating with yourself. I mean, I don't want to bring that up on a psychodynamic level, but I will leave that for some other time.
Well, what you mean? I can have cooperation fatigue about cooperating with myself? How would that work?
Yeah,
exactly?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I can get into a whole book on it, but yes. I don't know if I should get into it, but
no,
if I can, no, I shouldn't. But I'm just telling you, it's totally going on, folks.
Okay.
I mean, among individuals, yeah.
Hey, Zafir, do you have any thoughts on any of this? You've been listening intently.
I've got plenty of thoughts, but I'm mostly biting my tongue.
Well, don't bite it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So with cooperation, I would think about, why do we cooperate to begin with? What's the shared goal? What are we working towards? And So there has to be quite a lot of alignment to actually even have cooperation to work. So and then there's things that occur to you like, are we making progress? Do we feel like we're actually working towards something, actually, ticking off the little milestones towards it? Yeah, and you can't have fatigue unless you're working. So being pissed off is different from fatigue. So fatigue, I think fatigue is actually a good sign. It shows that you're you're doing some work. There's some exertion going on. So you have to plan to take breaks. But the really important thing about taking a break is planning to start working again. So if you are feeling fatigued, communicate. And it's like, yeah, cool, take a step back. As long as part of the taking a step back is actually acknowledging that you're going to start again. And then sometimes things just run their course. Maybe you're not making progress. Maybe the group isn't actually functioning. Maybe it's time to actually pull it apart and try something else. And yeah, that's kind of it. Also, I work with a lot of people that, and a lot of my peer group. Yeah, the educate yourself and the little comment that I was bristling out with people being stupid. Yeah, leadership is the thing that annoys people the most, where they see different standards. So there's another thing that ruins teams very, very quickly, is if they don't see the leader pulling their weight or rolling up and doing the sleeves and doing the job themselves. So if they're sort of standing back and giving orders, but not actually mucking in and being part of the team and doing the hard work, then that just gets people pissed off very, very quickly and can actually exacerbate disengagement. So that's just a few of the thoughts that are flying around in my head.
So are you saying that you don't see resentment? You see resentment as something different than cooperation fatigue, rather than as an emotion that you might feel when you have a cooperation fatigue?
Yeah, no, I see them as related but distinct. So fatigue is a result of exertion and doing work. Being pissed off could be for all sorts of reasons. Just not liking a person and not wanting to work with them anymore could be pissed off.
Okay.
Or not seeing them doing something.
So it's sort of like
so they're related, but they're not the same thing.
It's like a Venn diagram. There's an area of overlap between cooperation fatigue and resentment, but yeah, that makes sense, I think.
You remember, I wonder if everybody remembers where we got started on this idea in the first place. It was from that article about, it was basically an anthropological study of this small town or village.
That's right.
In which people have an annual celebration festival of some kind, which requires quite a lot of common labor. I mean, people have different roles to play and they need to sacrifice some of their time and so on and so forth. And the people who did the research were surprised to find that after the festival had taken place, the people who had been very eager to work for it and, helped to organize it and cooked for it and, sewed for it and everything, just withdrew. They became less interested in any kind of community effort or helping efforts and so forth. Whereas we didn't find it so surprising, and Hank immediately jumped on the idea of, can there be a fatigue? And is that a different kind of situation? I mean, there's a collective effort for a common goal, and some people are very, very active in motivating other people, making contributions and so forth. And those very people may be the ones who are least interested in doing something helpful to other people in the immediate aftermath.
I think you mentioned in your introduction, another question you had, Diane, was, are there individual differences? And of course, as a psychologist, my answer is yes to that always. There's never a question about individual differences in which the answer is not yes. But, it's a cooperativeness, if you will, like most traits, is probably on a bell curve. And
Sure.
I'm on a board of a local nonprofit, and we had our monthly meeting a few days ago, and one of the members of the board, who happens to be our secretary, her 3-year term is up, and she said, "I'm done." And like many small nonprofits, we have trouble getting sufficient volunteers. So there are people that have been on the board for 12 years because they can't find anybody to take their place, if you will. And so there are people that are quite fine with, I can do this forever. And other people who, I did my time, so I'm out of here. And that's it.
Sure.
So there
My
are
question,
individual differences for sure.
my question was actually more complex because it's that, if you look at the big five personality characteristics,
Agreeableness would be.
which ones of them are more involved in this? Agreeableness versus disagreeableness, you would think, yeah, that would
And-
have something to do with cooperation. For
and
example,
Conscientious.
extroversion, introversion, maybe not so much.
Yeah, maybe.
But folks, I want to remind us again that we're talking, I guess I should use the word a systems perspective. So I think Zafir, when you were describing it, I agree with you on those individual dynamics, but it's about the influence of the group atmosphere at whatever size the group is on the individuals and the collective subgroups of the individual. So it's not a particular situation. It's a much about how the group is optimally functioning, or what creates the situation where the group is not optimally functioning. I'll say, you guys remember, anybody who studied group dynamics? There was I forget it was early group studies in the 50s and the 60s. I forget, it was what do you call it? A small group on a
Lots of
oh God.
conformity studies in those days.
Yeah. But what was the one about sorry, but it was a bunch of guys on the assembly line, and the study had to do like what affects productivity and cooperation and productivity. And they went
Yeah,
through, is it lighting? Is it this or that?
Oh yeah, that's back in the 1920s, that study.
I don't remember. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it was
the
called
Hawthorne effect, is it?
What's that?
Hawthorne?
Yes, Hawthorne.
Is it them? Yeah,
Hawthorne,
whatever.
yes.
Anyways, the result was that their hypothesis was, or they came up with a thought that it had to do with binging. I don't know if you remember, but it was the interpersonal interaction. So if a new guy comes in or a woman comes in and they're really good at what they do and they're making the others look bad, they ignore the guy, like in a small face-to-face group. He starts realizing, holy shit, I want to belong, so let me slow down my pace. So if you think about the interpersonal influence, I mean, we're talking more complex, but so let's keep in mind, so it's not the individuals, but it's the atmosphere that's created by the individuals and what I call the group as a whole, or the whole is greater than some of its parts. So I keep going back to that. Since
I would translate.
I totally agree with that, but does it have to be either or? I think it's the group, it's the individual, it's the culture, it's the
all of them.
traditions, it's the
But
Yeah,
a
the whole
variable,
picture.
the variable that I think Hank is referring
it's
to,
one of the variables.
I would call it
Yes.
the social norm of cooperativeness, right?
That's right.
At each group you're in,
That's right.
there is a norm for how cooperative you should be, and the group will exert social pressure on you to conform to the norm. Either you shouldn't go either under it or over it. Right. And of course, there will be individual differences into how much one is susceptible to wanting to adhere to a norm. So I wonder, another question that might be interesting is,
Gotta go, folks. Sorry, Steve. Bye-bye.
Are
Thank you all.
religious groups more cooperative and less prone to cooperative fatigue?
It depends on the problem.
You mean what it is they're cooperating about?
What needs to be cooperated on, and it depends
That-
to some extent
That
on,
gets back to
the nature of
what I
the
said.
religious group.
Go ahead, Ken. Was that you?
Yeah.
Back to exactly what I said, and that's the intensity of their attachment to a particular dogma.
Yeah.
Most definitely affects it.
Zafir, you have a lot of knowledge about cults. I'm wondering, religious cults. I'm wondering if you, how does this discussion, how does that knowledge that you have inform your understanding of this topic?
I I don't run with the standard definition of a cult. Like a lot of people have a diagnostic checklist of a cult, and my understanding of what makes a cult is cost benefit ratio. So how costly it is to be a member, and the certainty that the leadership demands. So when you're in a cult, the membership don't really think for themselves. They actually don't have a choice. It's conform, do as you're told, or be punished. It's not put in that black and white terms, but that's the dynamic that's going on. So there is really, if there's fatigue, a well-organized cult that survives for a while has rest time built in, and doesn't demand too much from each of the members, but yeah, basically there's no individual thought. There's no ability to actually push back and actually demonstrate fatigue.
So it's really more whatever cooperation there is, we would call it, to hark back to what we were talking about earlier. Coerced.
Yeah, it's not really cooperation. It's enforced. It's a dictatorship.
Coerced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are we?
Could I ask a question? And that is, Ken.
Go ahead, Ken.
Could I just briefly ask a question? This gets back to a topic that was off topic. I'm sorry about that, but I just want to ask: does the ignorance of a particular political expression invalidate the validity of the moral violation that the individual feels? Do we have a lot of instances in which people's ignorant expression, people then say, "Oh, he's so stupid. His position is totally invalid." Just a thought.
This is a bit glib, but do you mean if a cop pulls me over for speeding and I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know what the speed limit is," that lets me off the hook for speeding? Is that what you're asking? Because it doesn't in the law,
No,
at least.
what I'm saying is if someone makes an angry political expression, for example, someone wearing a red hat with MAGA on it might make such an expression. People viewing him tend to then feel that the validity of the moral violation that he feels is somehow invalid. In other words, is the nature of the expression, does that invalidate the validity of the position? Because we see a lot of ignorant expression, but is it possible that there is some moral basis for some of that?
Ignorance is sometimes in the eye of the beholder, though. There are positions. I'm sure there are political positions I hold that somebody on the far right might consider ignorant or naive. You bleeding heart liberal, don't you realize whatever it is, right? So I don't know. Yeah.
I just want to say I don't use the word stupidity lightly. I never use that word. It's just a word. I can't think of any other word at this point for the dumbing down that has occurred.
Yeah.
And I'm not really talking about ignorance or right versus left. Just people are, I don't know how to, the stupider.
Well, yes and no. I kind of,
I don't mean innately.
No, I know, but Steven Pinker wrote a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is really debunking the commonly held idea that the world is more violent than it's ever been. And the book is filled with data to say, au contraire, the world is less violent than it's ever been. I wonder if we asked Professor Pinker to write one on intelligence, if he would find the same thing, that in fact people are smarter and more literate than they've ever been in human history. I suspect he sort of would. And another example of how there's nothing new under the sun, the famous journalist H.L. Mencken, who wrote for the Baltimore Sun back in the 1920s, one of his famous quotes are, "No one ever went broke underestimating the taste or intelligence of the American public." And that was said 100 years ago. So,
there's a new factor now. It's not something constant. There's this.
Well, What social media does is allow people that might be ignorant about something to group in a way that wouldn't have existed in the past. Yeah,
And
that's
their attention span is sabotaged.
mhm.
This is what I'm getting at.
Okay.
We're in a post-literate society almost.
It's interesting. Again,
Mm.
I don't know
That's a
what this has to
danger.
do with. I don't know what any of this has to do with cooperation fatigue, but that's fine.
But there is a
Rob
slight
wants to
overlap
speak.
perhaps.
Rob had his hand up.
I want to post a strenuous objection to Steven Pinker. I
Okay.
think that book is total bullshit.
Oh, okay. You want to support that
And I'm
claim?
not the only one.
Okay. What leads you to say that, Rob?
Well, first of all, I was doing a lot of work in the Paleolithic, and his claim that the Paleolithic was the most violent and dangerous time in human history is just patently false on the basis of the evidence.
Okay.
And I'm reading now a book called Goliath's Curse about the rise and fall of empires
Okay.
and why they fall, and actually why the fall of an empire is pretty good for most people. Bad for the elites, but good for most people, because by the time you get the inequality that leads to the collapse of an empire, um, people are in pretty bad shape.
That's
And
interesting.
he has several pages dealing with Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
saying.
That's
He
a
just
that's
I have to jump in and
he cherry picked his
defend.
data.
Yeah, I have to defend Pinker. I mean, it's very easy for people to say Pinker was wrong about X. Okay, he's wrong about, I think, several X's, but his basic thrust was to say everything is not socialization. We are not totally in control of what our children become. We have to look at our evolutionary background. We have to look at our innate tendencies and capabilities, such as language and so on and so forth.
Well, that
Blank
was the
slate.
blank. That was his argument in the blank slate. But the Better Angels of Our Nature was
Exactly.
about something different.
Better Angels was, I think, probably partly right, partly wrong, because
Yeah.
he's not a historian. That's
Right.
not his,
Right.
that's not his expertise.
Yeah.
But again, I think he's largely right.
Yeah. It's possible to get a whole bunch of trees wrong, but still get the forest right, which is
Yeah.
that's always my defense of Freud. Freud got so many trees wrong, but remarkably, I think got the forest kind of right, at least about the fact that there's unconscious motivation. There is we did an Examine Live session way back when that I led on warfare and war and the evolutionary psychology of war. And there was an article we read for that that was in the American Psychologist, and it was an anthropological review, sort of a meta literature review of what the anthropological literature is on warfare. And what I remember as the takeaway, Rob, from that literature review about sort of the level of violence in the Neolithic, at least, was that it was neither the peaceful Eden that some people want to think it was, but neither was it a bloodbath all the time. It was somewhere in the middle. That
That all came from Hobbes,
It's the
who had a
occasional
miserable
bloodbath.
yes, the
I think
occasional,
it's-
which still is the case. Well, we are at
There
12.
is some
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there is some just to add
Yeah.
it to this point, there is some historical evidence to support Pinker's assertions, and that's that archaeologists have looked and found and been able to calculate the percentage of population that have died in group conflict, and that has decreased the percentage has decreased dramatically. It was up to about 1 out of every 6 men in the 19th century,
Mhm.
and it's now up to 1 in 40 or 1 in 50 or 1 in 100.
Right.
So the world is,
That's because
and
we have
the
almost 9
scientifically,
billion people.
Okay. Well, we could have a
oh,
session.
percentage.
We could have a session sometime about whether Pinker was right or wrong. That would be interesting. Not that we would ever want everybody to read an entire book, but we're at 12:25 and totally unrelated to anything we've talked about. I went and saw Nuremberg last night, and I recommend it if you haven't seen it. It's a totally different take than the famous 1960 movie Judgment at Nuremberg, which is about the trial. This is based on a book about an army psychiatrist who interviewed Goering. And it's really about the cat and mouse game between that psychiatrist and that particular Nazi prisoner. It's very, very, very well done. So I recommend the film if you haven't seen it yet and you like history and psychology kind of combined. So with that unrelated topic and movie review, we'll convene again in December, and Alan hopefully will be recovered from the flu by then, and we'll be talking about oxytocin and tribalism and how oxytocin relates to tribalism. So thanks, everybody.
We'll be on a cruise, so I won't see you in December.
Okay, you're allowed. All right. Have a happy Thanksgiving, everybody, for those who are in places that celebrate it. All right. Bye, everybody.